So friends, in the second part of the discussion on Anaïs Nin, who was a prose writer and a poet, and a poet in the deeper sense of the sensibility that she had, we have Professor Payal Nagpal to now go further in the direction of her creativity, her concerns, the challenges that she faced, and the way those challenges finally were worked out in her poetry and other writings. So over to Professor Payal Nagpal.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So we discussed a short poem by Anaïs Nin, and I'll now draw attention towards some of the pieces that are from her diaries, and they're actually listed at times by critics as poems. So there is one which is I'm the most tired woman in the world. So she writes, I'm the most tired woman in the world, and I am tired when I get up. Life requires an effort I cannot make. Please give me that heavy book. I need to put something heavy like that on top of my head. I have to place my feet under the pillows always so as to be able to stay on earth. Otherwise, I feel myself going away at tremendous speed on account of my lightness. I know that I am dead. As soon as I utter a phrase, my sincerity dies, becomes a lie whose coolness chills me. So, this is only to, give a sense of the way in which her writing is extremely poetic. So, she goes on to say that I have such a fear of finding another like myself and a desire to find one. So, her many selves. I'm so utterly lonely, but I also have such a fear that my isolation be broken through and I no longer be the head and ruler of my universe. I am in great terror of your understanding by which you penetrate into my world. And then I stand revealed and I have to share my kingdom with you. It's lines like these that tell us that her diary writing combines her daily life, her observations about her life, her observations about other people, the society of which she is a part, and her, complete movement into a world of fantasy, the world of dreams. So there are moments when she says that, if there is subjugation around, she wants to take that the way it is because she wants to retain that alternative life. So she says she has no issues at times with the life that she's leading because she's very invested in this alternative life that she creates in her dreams. So, she says, I do not want to be the leader. I refuse to be the leader. I want to live darkly and richly in my femaleness. So here again, I think her diary writing, and we'll be looking at some instances more specifically, creates that idea of femaleness. If we look at it in terms of the feminist movement, so the first wave which gave the right to vote to women in England and America, so that wave is over. And women are now, the personal is political is the slogan of the second wave. And 1960s, it's interesting that she gets a lot of recognition. It is also the time when, by which time writers like Simone de Beauvoir or Betty Friedan, they have already come out with a new theory based on practical experience of what feminism is all about. So the second wave, in that sense, also focuses on women's personal lives. And it is probably this that draws attention to Anaïs Nin's work, and I think the recognition that she, really speaking, gets here. So, this should also be looked in tandem with the French feminists. And she's a French-born woman. She is fluent in French. So if we look at the combination of feminism and psychoanalysis in the French feminists, for whom again the trope of the body, sexuality, these are very important. These are like cornerstones of French feminism. So a combination of Anaïs Nin's writing with the French feminists is extremely volatile. They both bear each other out in a sense. So here, if you'd like to...
In fact, I would like to combine, the two segments of experience, the French and the English. And I would say that there is something of the Cuban in her, that's in her genes. And, Cuba was a very controversial presence in the 20th century.
Yes.
And some of the finest, political activists and leaders were born and they were active there. People like
Castro,
and,
of course.
and so these people are there, and she has that heritage, though she never would have perhaps lived her life in Cuba, and then that kind of sense of revolt that seems to be reflected here. And I'm sure that if people have remained indifferent to her, then maybe it's because of the Cuban connection, that they would not like to talk about an author who came from Cuba and settled in at the level of parents and all in France, and then shifted to America. So that kind of existence, I was just wondering whether there would be some kind of a distant connection between all these things.
In fact, when I see her photographs and when I see her writing, I see a French woman there, and don't really, see this is not writing that would be, I mean, if might sound like a cliche, but would not be written by somebody who's coming from America, because there is a kind of even within writing, the idea of liberation that is there is very French in its outlook, and which is why I refer to the French feminists, because a lot of things that she writes in her diaries, it pertains directly, and the French feminists, of course, kind of put it down in the 1960s and 70s. But Anaïs Nin kind of, she delivered this probably all her life. I mean, she started very early. So this consciousness of fantasy, this consciousness of dreams, of an alternative life, but more importantly, this consciousness of herself as a woman is something that Anaïs Nin's writing is very invested in. And where the feminists take it on much later, I think right from her early work onwards, one can see all this in her writing and the way she, of course, lives her life. So if one looking at her photographs, one sees more of, I think, the French, and it's a language that she was very fluent in. Her first 6 years of diary writing were in French. So she is, for example, when she says, I don't mind working, holding my ground intellectually, artistically, but as a woman, she says, I want to be dominated. Now, one is not to take her at a literal level here. And she says, I don't mind being told to stand on my own feet, not to cling, be all that I'm capable of doing, but I'm going to be pursued, she says. And here, it's almost as if what Anaïs Nin is saying, well, these are, the norms of the society, and these are the tropes by which you're expecting me to live, which is fine, but I will create my own life elsewhere. And so the diary becomes a repository, a poetic repository of this kind of writing. So if I were to just share another poem here, this is a poem which was probably written when she was very early in life, and it's very simple. So in the country, the trees bend under the weight of the rain that is falling in huge drops. Under the name cheater, for it brings a second night. The sky clears, illuminating the earth for a second, and then frightens the sleeping birds. So I think Professor Prakash mentioned, the romantic strain in her writing, and it is very, very profuse here. So with a great clap of thunder and like bitter tears, the drops of rain become noisily mixed with those already fallen. So if we, and she makes a direct reference to nature that hides under the rustling leaves, and she says about the flowers that the flowers close under this brutal dew. So dew is always seen as something very tender, but here it's completely reverse, and the soaked earth boasts of bearing this squall alone. So the birds flapping their wings lift themselves up and murmur softly, the storm. So this is another poem, and again she also brings in religion much later in the poem. But one can see that this is a young mind and the imagery is relatively simple. But if we shift from this early poem to something that she has written in Paris, revisited, she says about a cafe that she sees around her. And she says that one could sit there and feel unique, in tune with the world, or out of tune, feel human, open to human emotion and wanting to weep. And she talks about the cafe The small cafe and tenderness were not gone. The patina of much living, the worn, the tired, the wistful, my cafe, my Paris, where a soul can be a little worn, where it does not have to be shop new, shop glossy, hard and brittle. I mean, if you were to just look at 5 lines from this, which is, let's say, starting the small cafe, the sentence is one, it's a longish sentence running into about 5 lines, but shop new, shop glossy. So I think here she's critical of so much that she's already, this kind of consumerism that is there, and at the same time, the tenderness and the cafe, her love for Paris. So I think all these aspects are kind of seen very clearly in her writing. And this is, as I said, very different from her poem The Storm, which is written when she's very, very young, and she talks about, God and how God appears, and, a smile appears in his white beard, and he looks at the fear. And God says to himself softly, poor man, he cannot see anything in my greatness. Blind, undisciplined, poor man, it's a storm. But the indication is of change. The indication is the storm, the title Storm itself tells us about how things should change. And the change here, I think these shifting cells that she carries within her, one for the world and one in her diary. But at the same time, and this is a question that I'd like to ask you, what do you think about it? That much as she says in her writing that, she's happy to be dominated and to toe the line and so on, but in her writing it's all very different. But at the same time, her real life actually is a life where she has never followed any norms. And
True. That's very true.
so, one has to read between the lines, I think, when she says all this.
Not only between the lines, I think between the words.
Yes.
Now, there is a half sentence and then there is another word, and that word has no direct connection with the previous word. And yet, the two words come together, the poem that you quoted, and they open out a whole window on the world around. So, the early poem that you quoted was, that she was trying to keep her, feet on the ground,
Yes.
but then there is a pillow which is helping her in this, otherwise she would fly away.
She would fly
So just, from the ordinary to the extraordinary, from the real to the surreal, that journey and those flashes and those jolts to the imagination of the writer as well as to the reader, they are remarkable. I think this poetry has been now underrated, and there should be people to tell the literary reader of the 20th century that one has not to be academic all the time, but to see the sensibility at work, and that sensibility is working at a very subtle level, and
Yes.
the subtlety is the kind of essence that you have pointed out directly or indirectly in Anaïs Nin's poetry.
And great sensitivity in terms of writing and her responses to the world of which she is a part. So, the whole question of why she writes and this alternative world that she creates, again, to quote from a book that she had written, In Favor of the Sensitive Man. She says, one writes to create a world in which one can live. I could not live in any of the worlds offered to me. The world of my parents, the world of war, the world of politics. I had to create a world of my own, like a climate, a country, an atmosphere in which I could breathe, reign, and recreate myself when destroyed by living. That, I believe, is the reason for every work of art. I think these lines just left me quite speechless.
And
So,
even generally, it appears to be an individual voice, but this is not the individual voice. This is what is there ingrained in all of us. That when we are alone, when we talk to ourselves, when we talk about the world, then these are the phrases, these are the idioms that we use in order to respond to the challenges outside. So I think this thing has to be reinterpreted in terms of romanticism, in terms of nature, in terms of psychology that entered through romanticism in the 19th century, and there are 20th century writers like Virginia Woolf, who write this kind of a prose, and that prose, sometimes also attacks the rational, supposedly rational prose that is used by the male writers. So all these things, are there in her, and she's an exact contemporary of Virginia Woolf and the other authors at that time. Samuel Beckett would like to create distance, from between one word and another, and he would leave the whole thing to the reader, who will make one's own sense of the distinction as well as the connection between the two words.
In fact, if we also look at this statement, what she's saying is that she's also rejecting the world, the real world, so to say, of which she's a part, in which she's a performer of a certain kind. So she rejects that world. She says the world that her parents have given her, she is not able to, because the world that she has created is one where she can breathe and recreate herself. But the world that her parents have given her, that does not help. And the other is the world of war. This I thought is very important also, because we are looking at a writer who has seen the two world wars and has seen the period after the two world wars, and through the Cold War era and so on, and has moved pretty much into the 50s and 60s, a time period when a lot of the colonies across the world were, they had become independent, and I think that kind of understanding of a creation of a space for herself and a rejection of this world of war is important. She rejects what she calls the world of politics, and here I think she means the obvious politics that she might be dragged into, but she wants to live in a world where these things are not as murky as they are in the real world. So she says that is, and here we so many times we read writings by great writers about what is the role of literature, what is the function of literature, what is the role of art, and here she says that I believe is the reason for every work of art. So to, in a sense, reject the world in which you're a part, but at the same time to recreate it in art is something that she talks about. A very interesting series, a very interesting diary that is, part of the series of diaries on the life of Anaïs Nin is the volume 4. And volume 4 is important because it spans the period from 1944 to 1947, and that is the time period I think that we are looking at the world immediately after the Second World War. So what is the kind of, how is it that her writing changes in terms of this particular moment? So she says that she believes that if intellect has killed writing, then let the other kind of writing, which is emotional, kill the intellect. So which means that one has become too academic or too, so to say, intellectual in terms of writing. But she says what this has done is, and in a sense with modernism, one of the problems was the kind of effort that was probably made in terms of craft. So emotional is somewhere lost. So I think bringing the romantic back within the modernist times is what she has done. So she never looked at herself as somebody who would be stationed in one place, and she actually called herself, she said, if I were to have a symbol, then it would be a roving ship. And she says that she would rather have been a courtesan, and the rest, she says, of course, is in her diary. Another excerpt from her diary, and this clearly is a poetic piece. She says, I am still in the labyrinth, and I must be willing to get lost before I am saved. It is only when I abandon myself that I am saved. So, she's also bringing in the whole contradiction and, of course, refuting the whole, contention by religion also, where she says that, if she has to kind of be saved, then she has to be lost first, which, of course, the whole idea of the fall as imperative, in a sense, for, God to be the savior. So, so she believes in that kind of abandonment, and it's almost like saying, well, if she has to be saved, well, she needs to first get lost in the labyrinth, which means that, in a sense, she needs to commit pretty much to this life. And she says that, to lead a full life actually means to live and relate to others as if they might not be there tomorrow, as if you might not be there tomorrow. So it eliminates the vice of procrastination. There is always in her writing a desire to live life to the fullest and to not, kind of hinder one's movement in terms of societal norms. In fact, she doesn't pay any attention to that at all, whether it comes to her real life or to her writing. So, again, she says this feeling, to quote from again, and all these are poetic, all this is poetic prose. This feeling has become a rarity and rarer ever, every day now that we have reached a hasty and most superficial rhythm. Now that we believe we are in touch with a greater amount of people, more countries. This is the illusion which might cheat us of being in touch deeply with the one breathing next to us. So I think this, nothing can be more true than the lines by Nin, today. This is the illusion which might cheat us of being in touch deeply with the one breathing next to us, the dangerous time when mechanical voices, radios, telephones take the place of human intimacies, and the concept of being in touch with millions brings a greater and greater poverty in intimacy and human vision.
This is so very 21st century.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Artificial intelligence and all those things, and this is nothing but mechanization.
The tragedy of the times is that Anaïs Nin has been either accepted in terms of the intensely sexual references in her writing, or rejected on the basis of that. But her writing is so much more than
It's
what
deeply
we are
philosophical.
seeing. It's very philosophical.
She's raising questions about human existence. She's raising questions about expression of an honest kind to a world which may not listen to her. All these questions are very existential questions. And
today we talk about things like digital detoxification, to be away from gadgets, and
Yes,
how it's a kind of whether it's a global or whether it's a local kind of world. But I think she's already spelt it out and said that technology is one thing, but is it increasing or is it making human intimacy more impoverished? And she obviously thinks the latter.
And this she's saying in the 1960s, early 70s,
Yes,
when she would die.
Yes, and this is in fact earlier. This is 1944 to 47.
Oh, she
All
can
this is from, which is why I
anticipate.
focused on Diary Volume 4. So, and I think this is also, in a sense, a direct reference to what happened in the Second World War, of totally decimating a part of the human population. And I think the fact that development is not really going to lead us to better human lives
It's a
is
very
the point
deeply
she's
poetic
making.
voice, because whatever method she uses, whatever genre she is using, she is talking to the reader, she is talking to the individuals around her, she is talking about the world in which all of them are compelled to live and are searching for some kind of meaning and not getting it. So all these dilemmas, etc., they seem to be deeply ingrained in her writing and in a poetic voice.
Absolutely. If this could be these are like lines of a poem where she says the physical is a symbol of the spiritual world. She says people who keep old rags, old useless objects, who hoard, accumulate, they are also keepers and hoarders of old ideas, useless information, lovers of the past only, even in its form of detritus. She says, I have the opposite obsession. In order to change skins, evolve into new cycles, I feel one has to learn to discard. If one changes internally, one should not continue to live with the same objects. They reflect one's mind and psyche of yesterday. I throw away what has no dynamic, living use. I keep nothing to remind me of the passage of time, deterioration, loss, shriveling. So this is, I think these are the best lines. Of course, it's very good poetry, But I mean, if we analyze it, she's talking about change.
That's what poetry is, in fact.
And she's saying that anything, you're accumulating old idea, you are accumulating objects, you're accumulating old ideas. And the dynamism is not in old ideas, but in looking ahead.
As a matter of conclusion, this journey that you have covered from the pre First World War to the post Second World War period and the Cold War. So, what would you say about the entire journey? And
I think we need to, I think one thing that is very clear is that there needs to be more work on the writings of Anaïs Nin. And even if we look at, whatever is available, very little is. But because her work is all published and all available, there certainly needs to be more work done. Her poems are, there are just two that are available, but her diary writing is extremely poetic, and at times she is criticized that her diary writing is like a crutch for her that she latches on to, and she totally rejects this and says that her fuller life, the life that she wants to lead, is the life that she sketches out for herself in her diaries. So I think with Anaïs Nin, we have a writer, not just a diarist and an essayist, but a writer who's extremely creative, is making the boundaries of genres very, very fluid and flexible, and is very critical. She privileges the human over all else, and she privileges a kind of change-oriented life. And both these are extremely valuable, the human and change. I think these are the cornerstones of feminism, if we look at it.
Friends, Dr. Payal Nagpal has very aptly summed up the kind of role that she played in the 20th century and the questions she raised. And I'm sure that all of you who have heard the lecture would be benefited by this and would have many ideas which are just to be worked out by all of us together. So with this, I thank Professor Payal Nagpal for this wonderful analysis of a contemporary author who was there till the other day and who became, in fact, more relevant post her death.
Yes.
So thank you, and thanks, Professor Payal Nagpal.
Thank you, Professor.